In this video, I'm going to show you how to do hand-cut dovetails using the tails first method. Start by laying out all of the sides of your box or whatever your piece is. Label the sides so that you don't lose track of which ones mate with each other and which orientation that they go. The next step is to get nice scribe lines, the thickness of your boards along each of the edges. So here I have a homemade cutting guide, a gauge that I made. So nice deep score line severing the fibers. Those cut lines are going to be what you use to set the depth of the joinery later. So as in most joinery, it's very important you get that done well. There are a number of ways that you can set the spacing of your tails. Here I'm using dividers to set and make nice little lines. I'm going for very, very thin pins, so the spacing between them is going to be relatively thin. From those marks, I then make square lines across the end of this piece. Not necessary, but for the purpose of the video, I'm marking that knife edge line that shows the depth where these are going to go, and then mark in the angles of the tail with a dovetail marker. So next, using your thumbnail as a guide for the saw, you're going to cut following the angle of the dovetail lines down the side and making sure you stay perfectly square across the top end of the board. These cuts go the depth of the lines you marked initially, making sure you reach that depth in both the face towards you as well as the face away from you. Next, with the board on its side, going a little bit away from the cut line, just cut to pop out this end piece. Now, using a chisel in that knife line, we get to cut straight square across so that we are staying parallel with that knife line on all three sides. If you can cut a little bit concave down into the space towards the bottom of this tail, you can do that as long as you don't leave any material proud that will prevent this joint from closing later. Now for chopping. Now I made my life a little bit difficult by keeping these pins so narrow, but first start by chopping halfway through a little bit away from the knife line. You'll come back later and go right into the knife line, but with a hardwood like this cherry, you don't ever want to take off more than a 1/16 of an inch max, because that thickness of the wood will change and drive the angle of the chisel, and you won't end up with that nice beautiful square edge that you're looking for. Back in the vise, you can clean those sockets out. You want to leave nice, flat, square sides across the bottom, and as square, smooth, and straight as you can down the sides of the tails as well. We'll now use those tails to mark for the pins directly off of the mating piece. One of the reasons you'll see the marks here, so make sure we have the two mating pieces and be extra careful of the orientation before you set it in here. Line it up straight, square, and flush. You can put a chamfer on the back to facilitate with this. I don't think you need to, but it's a choice. And then using a nice sharp marking line, you're going to go up against those edges of the tails and make a nice deep cut that we're going to then use that establishes the edge of the pins. Now we use a dovetail marker again, but now we're just marking down square for this next set of cuts. Just like before, use your thumb to establish the cut. Make sure you're cutting on the waist side of the line. Here we use a coping saw or a fret saw to remove the majority of the waste between the pins. Chopping is the same as before, working your way back slowly to the knife lines. The only difference is here you need to pay attention to the angle of the pins, recognizing that they get wider as you go down or narrower as you go down, depending on the side. Make sure you don't accidentally chop through your pins. The goal here is to be perfect across your knife lines, and if anything, perhaps a little bit undercut as you get in towards the center of the board, as that'll be invisible. You're really just going to see the lines on the outside in the joint. This is an optional step, but you can cut a little chamfer on the bottom edge of each of the tails to just help the joint start being seated. That's going to be hidden inside of the joint, and if you put too much glue, that just gives it a little bit of space for that to go before squeezing out. From here on out, it's just a bunch of test fitting and cleaning up. Every time you find a high spot or where it's a little tight, pare off a tiny little bit of material. You can choose to use a pencil or something else to transfer from one side of the joint to the other, or you can just do it by eyeball as I'm doing here. At this point, if you've been patient, taking your time, and just gone slowly and crept up on it, you are hopefully going to end up with just a really nice tight fitting joint.